It was just after 11:42 p.m. on a humid spring night when a chilling sound echoed through a quiet home on the edge of town. A sound so sudden, so violent, that it startled the artificial intelligence device sitting silently in the corner of the living room. The smart speaker, designed to answer questions, play music, and control lights, wasn't supposed to be a witness, but on that night, it was. Later, investigators would play back the recording, their faces tightening as they realized what they were hearing, the final moments of a young mother's life. And what the device captured would dismantle the carefully crafted lies of her killer. I'm Martins, and on this channel, we explore true crime cases solved by everyday technology, from smartwatches to smart speakers. We examine how the data these devices collect inadvertently becomes the crucial witness that criminals never accounted for. If you want more cases like this, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss an upload. All right, let's get into it. The neighborhood of Riverside Hills wasn't the kind of place people locked their doors at night. Nestled just beyond the downtown strip, it was a community where children played basketball in driveways, and neighbors greeted one another by name during morning walks. The air was usually filled with the scent of cut grass and the faint hum of crickets. In one of those modest, two-story homes lived Clara Jennings, a 28-year-old nursing student and single mother. To the outside world, Clara's life appeared full of promise. She was balancing her final semester at the local community college while working part-time at a pediatric clinic. Friends described her as radiant, endlessly empathetic, and fiercely devoted to her 3-year-old daughter, Ava. But on the night of her death, that image of promise was brutally shattered. When first responders entered her home after a frantic 911 call, they found a scene that raised far more questions than answers. And it was only when they pulled digital data from a device most people overlooked that the full truth would begin to emerge. Clara was born in 1994, the youngest of 3 children in a working-class family. Her father was a mechanic, her mother a homemaker, who later trained as a school aide. Growing up, Clara was the energetic one, constantly in motion, always seeking to help others. Teachers often recalled how she would stay after class to help classmates who struggled, even when she herself had assignments waiting. Her older sister, Danielle, once said, "Clara didn't just care about people, she carried them. If someone was hurting, she'd feel it like it was her own pain." This compassion drew her to healthcare. After finishing high school, she enrolled in a nursing program, convinced that caring for others wasn't just a job, it was a calling. At the pediatric clinic where she worked, colleagues admired her ability to calm nervous children. One co-worker remembered, "She had this way of kneeling down to a child's eye level, making them feel safe." You couldn't teach that. It was just who she was. Her ambition was to become a pediatric nurse practitioner, a path that would allow her to provide both care and counseling for families. To Clara, this was more than a career. It was about creating stability, not just for her patients, but for her own daughter. In her early 20s, Clara met Derek Lawson, a charismatic local entrepreneur. Derek had dreams of starting his own fitness business, and at first, the two seemed inseparable. They shared laughter-filled nights at small-town diners, spontaneous road trips, and endless plans for the future. Friends described their chemistry as undeniable, but over time, cracks began to appear. Derek's ambitions often clashed with Clara's steady, focused path. He became restless, unpredictable, and impatient with her school commitments. After Ava was born, tensions escalated. Eventually, their relationship ended, and Clara found herself navigating single motherhood. By the time of her death, Clara had settled into a demanding but structured routine. She woke early to prepare Ava's breakfast, dropping her off at daycare before heading to classes or her shift at the clinic. Evenings were devoted to her daughter, storybook readings, playtime in the backyard, and small celebrations of everyday life captured in cheerful Instagram posts. She was active on social media, often posting pictures of Ava's milestones. In one photo, from just weeks before her death, Ava beams in a princess costume, while Clara captions, "She makes me braver every day." To outsiders, Clara projected resilience and warmth, a young mother determined to give her child a brighter future. Yet behind that polished image was strain. Friends noticed the occasional tension when Derek arrived for visitation. There were whispers of late-night phone calls that left her shaken, text exchanges filled with arguments, and a lingering sense of unease that Clara never fully explained. One friend later admitted, she didn't want to burden anyone. She'd smile and say she was fine, but I think she was carrying more than she let on. This was the illusion, a perfect life on the surface, but with undercurrents of conflict that hinted at something darker looming beneath. In the weeks leading up to her death, Clara's demeanor shifted subtly. Though still outwardly cheerful, she confided in a close friend that she felt watched. She mentioned cars idling near her street at odd hours, shadowy figures she couldn't quite place. A string of unsettling texts arrived on her phone, some pleading, others angry. In one, the sender wrote, "You can't just erase me. You know we're not finished." When asked if she'd reported it, Clara brushed it off, saying she didn't want to cause drama. It wasn't clear if these messages came from Derek or someone else, but they unnerved her. Still, she kept moving forward, focused on her daughter and her career, unwilling to let fear dictate her life. Meanwhile, Derek's life had taken a downturn. The fitness business he poured money into was collapsing under debt. His charm had soured into frustration, and those who knew him said he often spoke bitterly about Clara. Though separated, he seemed unable to accept her independence, particularly as she excelled academically and socially while raising Ava. To some, Derek appeared obsessed, not with reconciliation, but with control. When Clara began seeing someone new casually, the tension sharpened. Friends recalled Derek's temper flaring when he learned of her dating. The exact moment that pushed things past repair is still debated. Some believe Derek discovered Clara had blocked him on social media. Others suggest he grew enraged after overhearing her plans to move into a safer apartment complex farther from him. Whatever the trigger, his anger brewed, building to a breaking point. In the days before her death, Clara tried to maintain normalcy. She attended Ava's daycare Halloween party, helped her sister shop for decorations, and even posted a cheerful message about completing a clinical exam. But those closest to her noticed something in her eyes, an unease she couldn't disguise. Derek, meanwhile, seemed to vanish from his usual routines. A co-worker noted he left work early several nights without explanation. Surveillance cameras later revealed his car circling Clara's neighborhood more than once. It was the calm before a storm no one expected to break with such ferocity. April 17th began like any other Thursday in Riverside Hills. Clara woke early, packed Ava's lunch with neatly sliced fruit and a peanut butter sandwich, and snapped a quick photo of her daughter wearing mismatched socks. Something she found adorable enough to post on Instagram with the caption, "She insists they're her superhero socks. Who am I to argue?" That morning, she dropped Ava at daycare, hugged her goodbye, and drove across town for her nursing classes. Surveillance from the campus parking lot captured her arrival at 8:12 a.m., a bag slung over her shoulder and a coffee cup in hand. Students remembered her participating in class, attentive and engaged as always, laughing with a study group about exam questions. In the afternoon, she worked a short shift at the clinic, logging in patients and assisting with routine vitals. Co-workers said nothing seemed unusual. She was upbeat, though she checked her phone more than once. One recalled her smiling faintly before tucking the phone away quickly, as though hiding the message from view. By 6 p.m., Clara picked up Ava from daycare. They stopped at the grocery store, buying macaroni, milk, and a small chocolate cake. A just-because treat, she told the cashier, was to celebrate her daughter's new bedtime storybook. The pair returned home just after 7 p.m., greeted by the quiet of their two-story house. Neighbors saw them in the backyard as the evening light faded, Ava riding her small pink tricycle while Clara folded laundry on the porch. It was a serene, ordinary scene, one no one could have guessed was her last. Inside the Jennings home, the Alexa smart speaker sat perched on a living room shelf near the television. For months, Clara had relied on it for simple tasks, playing lullabies, setting reminders for classes, even dimming the lights when her hands were full. That night, Alexa's digital memory showed a familiar pattern. At 8:03 p.m., Clara asked it to play a playlist called Calm Nights. At 8:45, a voice command lowered the thermostat. At 9:12, Clara set a reminder for clinical paperwork tomorrow morning. Each command painted the picture of a young mother winding down, tending to her child, preparing for another busy day. By 10:15 p.m., she asked Alexa to turn off living room lights before heading upstairs with Ava. The device fell silent for nearly an hour, but at 11:42 p.m., everything changed. Alexa was designed to respond only when triggered, but it also kept temporary audio snippets, logging background sounds when it detected speech or unusual volume shifts. That night, the device captured something it was never intended to: Clara's final moments. At 11:42, the system picked up loud footsteps on the hardwood floor, followed by the creak of a door opening. There was a muffled exchange, a man's voice, firm, low, words indistinct. Then Clara's voice, sharper, urgent, cutting through the air. The transcript later revealed her words. "Derek, please, not here. Ava's upstairs." Seconds later came the crash of furniture toppling, a scream and a thud so forceful it triggered the device's noise detection protocol. Neighbors later admitted they heard nothing, perhaps mistaking the sound for a slammed door or late-night TV. But inside, Alexa had captured the chilling soundtrack of violence. Investigators who reviewed the partial clip recoiled. The victim's own words named Derek in the heat of terror. To them, it was the smoking gun. What happened in the minutes afterward was more unsettling still. At 11:45 p.m., the device recorded heavy breathing and the sound of something being dragged across the floor. Footsteps moved back and forth, the faint squeak of a door hinge echoing into the living room. There were moments of silence, broken only by the shuffle of shoes and the sound of water running from the kitchen faucet. For investigators, this appeared to show a killer lingering at the scene, perhaps cleaning, perhaps searching for something. The timestamp aligned with when Clara's phone abruptly went offline. But most chilling was what the device didn't record. Clara's voice never came again after that desperate plea. At 11:59 p.m., a 911 call came in. The caller identified himself as Derek Lawson. His tone was rushed, panicked. He told dispatchers he had just arrived at Clara's home and found her unresponsive. He claimed he'd knocked on the door earlier, gotten no answer, and returned later to discover the front door ajar. "She's not breathing. There's blood. Please, you have to hurry." Police arrived within minutes. They found Clara on the living room floor, her body partially concealed behind an overturned chair. The scene was chaotic. Furniture askew, broken glass glittering on the carpet, a struggle clearly evident. Derek was there, pacing, hands trembling. His shirt streaked with blood he claimed came from trying to check Clara's pulse. Officers described his demeanor as both distraught and erratic, his explanations tumbling out in fragmented bursts. He insisted he hadn't hurt her, that he'd come to check on her after receiving no response to earlier texts. But the officers couldn't ignore the device sitting quietly on the shelf. A silent witness that had already recorded her voice crying his name in terror. From that moment, suspicion tightened around Derek. He had motive, jealousy, financial strain, bitter resentment over Clara's independence. He had opportunity. His car was spotted by a neighbor earlier that night, idling at the corner of the street. And now he had Clara's final words preserved in digital memory, her own voice implicating him. The Alexa recording seemed irrefutable. For detectives at the scene, it was the breakthrough they needed. Yet even in those early hours, there were details overlooked. Alexa's log didn't stop at 11:42. It continued for several minutes afterward, capturing subtle noises that no one bothered to analyze in the rush to pin the crime on Derek. Investigators dismissed the later audio, assuming it was corrupted or irrelevant once Clara had fallen silent. Patrol units sealed the block by 12:06 a.m., blue strobes washing over the clipped hedges of Riverside Hills. Crime scene techs moved with quiet precision, photographing the entryway, flagging a shard of glass near the living room, dusting the doorknob, and taping off the staircase so no one tracked fibers upstairs where a sleeping child might awaken. One officer stood sentry outside Ava's room, listening to the small, steady rhythm of a child's breathing, oblivious to the storm below. In the living room, Derek Lawson answered questions in circles. He said he'd come by because Clara hadn't replied to texts. He said he had a key from before, then faltered and claimed the door was ajar. He said he tried chest compressions, then admitted he wasn't sure what to do. When the officer asked why there was blood on his cuffs but none on the front of his shirt, he said he'd knelt too quickly and barely touched her. Neighbors were canvassed. A man 2 doors down thought he'd seen Derek's car earlier, engine idling under the street lamp. A woman across the way remembered a figure walking briskly toward Clara's porch around 11:30 p.m., head down, hood up, hands in pockets. She couldn't make out the face, but she swore the jacket looked just like the one she'd seen Derek wear to pickups. The note went into the log. Another neighbor mentioned hearing what sounded like furniture scraping across a floor, but assumed someone was rearranging a room late. Detectives noted the smart speaker perched against the living room wall, its tiny ring light idle. One of them photographed it from 3 angles and bagged the nearby power strip, just in case they needed the serials. But the device itself remained, silent, still, and heavy with the thing it had heard. At dawn, the medical examiner took custody. The preliminary report, what investigators call a verbal, arrived by mid-morning. The injuries suggested a rapid escalation: bruising around the neck and clavicle, abrasions across the forearms, contusions consistent with striking a furniture edge, and a single, deep laceration near the hairline. The pattern spoke of a struggle that moved through the room. The toppled chair and scattered items supported it. No obvious ligature was recovered at the scene, but pressure marks on the throat could indicate manual strangulation during the assault. Toxicology would take time. Under her nails, technicians collected trace material, skin cells perhaps, though contamination from Derek's claimed attempt to help complicated interpretation. The ME would not commit beyond homicide by combined blunt force trauma and asphyxia, pending full results. It was enough for detectives, a violent confrontation, fast and personal. By afternoon, detectives were building the scaffolding of a case around Derek. Motive was plentiful: jealousy, financial desperation, anger at being cut out of Clara's future. Opportunity was plausible. Multiple sightings of his car in the vicinity, and he placed himself at the scene not long after the estimated time of death. Means: the room itself was a weapon. Hard edges, a panic-driven scramble, a killer's hands. Then came the partial audio clip from Alexa. Clara's voice, terrified, saying his name. Taken together, the mosaic looked complete enough that one detective used a word no investigator should utter too soon: closed. But the scaffolding had seams. For one, the timeline. The neighbor's estimate, around 11:30, turned out to be based on a wall clock that ran 5 minutes slow. Traffic camera footage from the main road caught Derek's car at 11:37 p.m., less than a mile away, heading toward the neighborhood, but not yet on her street when the device first detected the altercation at 11:42 p.m. Close, incriminating, but not perfectly overlapping. And then the question of transfer. In violent, up-close attacks, suspects often carry microscopic echoes of the crime away with them: high-velocity spatter, hair, microscopic skin fragments. Derek's clothes had blood, his cuffs, but minimal patterning elsewhere. He said he'd touched her neck, checked for a pulse, which could explain the cuffs, could not would. The absence of more wasn't proof of innocence. But it wasn't nothing. None of this absolved him. It simply meant they would need to tighten the thread, pull again, see what moved. In the days that followed, leads that looked promising dissolved on contact. The neighbor across the street, who thought she recognized Derek's jacket, began to doubt herself after watching the news. Maybe it was just a hooded sweatshirt, she admitted, and I've seen him in one before, so I assumed. A co-worker who described Derek as controlling later softened the word to intense. The daycare records showed a recent heated exchange during pickup, but it was about scheduling. Tense, not explosive. The investigators still had Clara's words, recorded by the device, echoing in their heads. But a prosecutor cautioned them to find corroboration. A single utterance can anchor a narrative. It shouldn't be the only nail holding up a case. For 48 hours, the investigation risked slipping into that dangerous space, not cold exactly, but cooling, where nothing moves and the story you already believe replaces the questions you still need to ask. The breakthrough did not arrive with a confession or a dramatic new witness. It arrived in the form of a quiet question from a digital forensics analyst flipping through the property list. Where's the cloud request for the smart speaker? The primary detective blinked. We have the local clip. Right, the analyst said, tapping the screen. But these devices don't just record locally. They ping servers, logs, transcripts, sometimes even audio snippets beyond what the end user can access. And the home automation stuff, lights, plugs, thermostat, Those generate their own event timelines. If we want granularity, we need the cloud. Granularity. In digital investigations, granularity is the difference between a hunch and a hinge. It can move a timeline by seconds that matter. The room shifted. Subpoenas were drafted. A warrant was prepared to obtain voice event logs, audio captures, timestamps, and home automation state changes from the manufacturer. Parallel requests went to the ISP for router connection logs, to the thermostat vendor for temperature and motion sensor events, and to the lighting system for on-off state changes. A separate packet sought phone metadata for both Clara and Derek. Tower pings, message timestamps, app activity windows. The net widened, not to let suspects slip through, but to catch each second as it fell. To build the warrant, the detective team needed to explain the how to a judge. Smart speakers continuously listen for a wake word, buffering audio in ephemeral memory. When the wake word, or a sound that resembles it, triggers the device, it preserves a slice of audio before and after the activation. Some events yield text transcripts. Others are logged as non-speech triggers, loud crashes, screams, or bursts of sound that mimic speech. In homes with automations, the device also records events like turn off living room lights, lower thermostat, and play playlist with precise timestamps. In Clara's case, they already had the user-accessible clip, her terrified plea containing Derek's name. But server-side data might include longer context, dozens of milliseconds here, a few seconds there, enough to sharpen edges that still looked blurry. Moreover, home automation timelines could corroborate or contradict human statements. If someone claimed to arrive at 11:50 p.m., but the living room lights were turned off via voice at 11:53, after that person said they called 911, then the order of operations was off. If the thermostat was changed after the struggle, someone was still making choices. The device could not tell a story with motives, but it could tell a story with time. The affidavit laid it out. A violent death, a known altercation captured by the device, a suspect identified by name in the recording, and a need to obtain the full scope of device and automation data to reconstruct the minute-by-minute sequence. The judge signed. The manufacturer's response arrived in batches. First came the event log, a tidy column of timestamps and labels. Playlist start, lights off, reminder set. Then a block of entries at 23:42 labeled voice event/high amplitude. There were also entries at 23:45 and 23:46 flagged as background noise/ambient capture. One line, sandwiched between mundane metadata, showed a short-lived connection hiccup. Brief packet loss, immediate reconnection. Something had jolted the local network, even for a second. Next came the audio artifacts, not a continuous tape, but curated segments associated with triggers. The initial one matched what the team had already heard. Clara's voice in panic, the thud, the scramble. The later segments were shorter, annotated by the server as non-lexical. The system's way of saying sound existed, but words were indistinct. It would require audio forensic enhancement to get more. Finally, the home automation trace. At 23:43, a command to dim the living room lights registered, not via app, but via voice, with no recognized wake word in the text field. At 23:44, the kitchen faucet sensor detected running water. At 23:45, the living room plug associated with the table lamp toggled off, then on, then off again. 3 taps in under 15 seconds, consistent with someone fumbling or experimenting. At 23:46, silence until the 23:59 911 call on Derek's phone. None of this exonerated him. In fact, some of it made him look worse. If he arrived and immediately called 911, why did the lamp toggles? Why the faucet? Why the dim command? He said he panicked. Panic can look like anything. But the order mattered, and no one panics into dimmer lighting. The detective in charge closed her notebook and stared at the event list. "We're missing something," she said quietly. "Not innocence, not guilt, something. A sliver out of place." The analyst requested expedited audio enhancement on the short, later ambient clips. It would take time. Meanwhile, Derek's phone records were queued for analysis. The officers returned to the neighborhood to double-check cameras to ask if any doorbells caught a clearer angle. They retimed the neighbor's clock, remeasured walking distances, replayed the 911 call for cadence anomalies. They were meticulous, but their minds held the same image: Clara's voice saying his name, the house spinning into chaos. Outside, Riverside Hills resumed its morning rituals, sprinklers ticking, dogs tugging their leashes, while inside a police lab, machines listened to the night over and over, trying to hear what the people, in their certainty, might have missed. Detectives sat Derek Lawson in interview room 3. The walls were grey, the air thick, the single camera in the corner blinking. He rubbed his wrists where the cuffs had chafed, muttering under his breath that this was a mistake, that he hadn't hurt her, that they were making a terrible error. One detective slid a printout across the table, the Alexa transcript, Clara's voice preserved forever. "Derek, please, not here. Ava's upstairs." "Explain this," the detective said flatly. Derek stared at the page as though it might dissolve if he looked hard enough. He shook his head, swore he hadn't been there when the struggle happened. He said he'd only arrived afterward, that maybe Clara was calling for him, expecting him to protect her. The detective leaned forward. "She wasn't calling you for help. She was begging you to stop." In that moment, Derek understood the gravity. Every byte of data, every digital echo, was now a noose tightening around him. The team began building a dual timeline: Clara's digital life versus Derek's. On the left side of the board, Clara's phone pings, Alexa events, thermostat logs, light switches. On the right, Derek's cell tower hits, app usage, GPS traces, banking logins. At first, the two seemed to converge perfectly. Clara's phone went dark at 11:42. Derek's phone disconnected from a tower on the main road at 11:40, reconnecting near her neighborhood at 11:41. By 11:59, his 911 call pinged from inside her house. Investigators drew a thick arrow between the 11:42 Alexa entry and Derek's 11:41 tower ping. To them, it looked like inevitability. He was there. Then came the text history. Derek's phone showed a string of unanswered messages to Clara earlier that evening. "We need to talk. I'm outside. Open the door. Don't ignore me." The last one was sent at 11:35, just 7 minutes before Alexa captured the fatal struggle. Clara never replied. To the detectives, the silence was telling. She was alive to hear the knocks, alive to ignore the texts, alive to say his name in panic minutes later. It was circumstantial, but powerful. The audio forensic lab returned with its first enhancement of the ambient clips, the ones captured after Clara's voice fell silent. The initial playback was grainy, full of static, but under the hiss, patterns emerged: the scrape of a chair leg, the clink of glass, the sound of liquid splashing into a sink, then footsteps, deliberate, steady, crossing the room. But one thing stood out to the audio tech. The footsteps were heavier than Derek's known weight class suggested. Clara was 5 feet 4 inches, Derek 6 feet 1 inch, but he was lean, wiry. The steps sounded denser, the impact sharper, as though the person moving had a heavier build or was wearing weighted boots. It wasn't proof, just another seam, another place where the narrative didn't sit perfectly. Meanwhile, videotechs pulled grainy CCTV from a corner shop 2 blocks from Clara's house. At 11:28 p.m., the footage showed a tall figure in a hooded jacket walking quickly past the storefront, head down. The stride was long, hurried. From a distance, it could have been Derek. But when analysts enhanced the clip, something odd appeared, the outline of a mask beneath the hood. Not a surgical mask, but something heavier, molded, like a face, covering that obscured the nose and jawline. Why would Derek, someone known in the neighborhood, someone supposedly arriving openly to confront Clara, hide his face? The detectives didn't pursue the question aggressively. They assumed the blur was compression artifacting, or that Derek had pulled up a scarf. They chalked it up to panic, to him not wanting cameras to see his face during a crime. In their minds, it still fit. But the seed of doubt was there, if only someone was willing to water it. One analyst noticed another anomaly. A brief login to Clara's streaming account at 11:47 p.m., 5 minutes after her device went dark. The account was accessed from inside the home, initiating a short connection with a playlist before stopping abruptly. If Derek was already panicked and preparing to call 911, why would he or anyone trigger music? Was it accidental, a voice command misheard, or had someone else still been in the room, fumbling with the device while trying to mask their movements? For now, the question hung unanswered. Meanwhile, forensic review of Derek's phone revealed troubling inconsistencies. While his call log and messages matched his story, metadata told a different tale. At 11:44 p.m., 2 minutes after Clara's Alexa device logged the altercation, Derek's phone briefly disconnected from the network, almost as though it had been powered down or its signal deliberately shielded. When it reconnected, the location placed him near the neighborhood, but GPS accuracy fluctuated wildly, showing him at one moment on the street, another in a parking lot 2 blocks away. Could a phone be spoofed, manipulated? Yes. Could it simply be a quirk of poor service? Also, yes. The ambiguity fed the narrative both ways. For investigators, the mosaic was damning enough. Clara had cried his name. His car was nearby. His texts showed anger. His phone data wavered, but didn't free him. His 911 call came from her house, his cuffs stained with her blood. But within the team, a few voices urged caution. The lab enhancements weren't finished. The later Alexa audio still hadn't been fully decoded, and the mask glimpsed in the CCTV footage lingered like a shadow no one wanted to chase. One sergeant said quietly in a meeting, "What if we're looking at this wrong? What if someone wanted us to see Derek here?" The room fell silent. The lead detective shook her head. "We follow the evidence, and the evidence points to him. But evidence can lie, especially when manipulated." The next enhancement batch from the audio lab revealed something subtle. At 11:46, a muffled phrase, male, unintelligible at first. After filtering, the tech tentatively identified 2 syllables. Not Derek's name, but something else, like a grunt, or perhaps the start of a word. It wasn't enough to present in court, but it was enough to unsettle. The report landed on the detective's desk, where it was skimmed, marked inconclusive, and filed away. Meanwhile, Derek sat in a holding cell, staring at the blank wall, muttering that no one believed him. He didn't know yet that the device, the same one damning him, still held a secret no one had taken the time to uncover. For the moment, the story remained simple. Clara's final plea, a jealous ex, a crime of passion. The truth, far stranger, far darker, waited in the untouched seconds of audio still buried in the cloud. On the morning of April 22nd, 5 days after Clara's death, detectives executed the arrest warrant. Derek Lawson was pulled from his small apartment on the east side of town. Neighbors watched through blinds as officers led him down the walkway, wrists cuffed, head bowed, his once proud stride reduced to a shuffle. The statement released to the press was blunt. Suspect arrested in connection with the homicide of local nursing student and mother, Clara Jennings. News crews swarmed Riverside Hills. Headlines echoed, "Ex-boyfriend arrested after Alexa Records plea." Public opinion hardened instantly. In a world where technology rarely lies, the case seemed closed. But cases rarely are as simple as they look. In preliminary hearings, the prosecution painted a familiar narrative. Clara wanted independence. Derek couldn't handle rejection, and a confrontation spiraled into violence. They presented text messages as a breadcrumb trail of obsession, neighbors' testimony about seeing his car, and most damning, the Alexa audio clip. They played it in open court. Clara's trembling voice saying his name, the crash, the scream. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Jurors visibly flinched. To the prosecution, this was more than a sound bite. It was a dying declaration, a plea from a victim naming her killer in real time. Combined with Derek's blood-stained cuffs and the timeline of his phone near her house, it painted a portrait of guilt too vivid to ignore. Derek's court-appointed attorney pushed against the tide. She argued that the Alexa recording was incomplete, taken out of context. She suggested that Clara could have been calling for Derek, not condemning him. She emphasized the gaps, the unexplained light dimming, the faucet running, the odd toggling of the lamp. She pointed to the CCTV clip showing a hooded figure with what looked like a mask. But the prosecution dismissed these as distractions. The mask, they said, was compression blur. The lights, mere panic. The faucet, irrelevant. The lamp, coincidence. And as for the audio, the prosecution insisted, we can only work with what we have, and what we have is the victim naming her killer. It was a brutal uphill climb for the defense. When Derek chose to testify, his words tumbled out fast, desperate. He swore he hadn't hurt Clara. He said he'd come to check on her because she wasn't answering. He said he found her already collapsed. But under cross-examination, he faltered. Why had he sent angry texts? Why was his car seen near her street earlier? Why did his cuffs have blood, but not his shirt? Why did his phone disconnect from the network during the crucial minutes of the attack? Each question chipped away at his credibility. To jurors, his insistence of innocence sounded less like truth and more like denial. Court reporters noted how jurors shifted whenever the Alexa clip was played. Some couldn't look away. Others leaned back, arms crossed, faces pale. The power of hearing a victim's voice from beyond the grave was overwhelming. One analyst later remarked, "You can show jurors 100 charts, 100 exhibits. But when they hear a voice in real time, crying out, everything else fades. That's the moment that stays with them." For Derek, that moment sealed his fate in the eyes of many. And yet, Even as the prosecution pressed forward, subtle cracks spread under the surface. The audio lab delivered a second report, noting anomalous frequency shifts in the later ambient clip, signs of a muffled voice, possibly speaking after the main struggle. The lab requested more time for enhancement, but the prosecution downplayed it. Inconclusive. Non-probative. The judge moved on. A forensic gate analyst, reviewing the CCTV footage frame by frame, noted a subtle hitch in the stride of the hooded figure, a heavier left footfall, inconsistent with Derek's documented athletic gait. His attorney tried to admit this as evidence, but the prosecution objected, claiming the footage was too grainy for reliable analysis. The judge sided with them. Piece by piece, the anomalies were noted, then dismissed. To the jury, they never became part of the story. All the while, Clara's family sat in the gallery, their grief palpable. Her sister Danielle wept openly each time the recording played. Her parents stared at Derek with hollow eyes, as if searching for answers that words couldn't give. The presence of little Ava, too young to understand, kept out of the proceedings, hovered like a ghost over every testimony. For them, the case was more than evidence. It was about justice, closure, and the unbearable weight of absence. In closing, the prosecution leaned into emotion as much as evidence. They told the jury that technology doesn't lie, that Clara's voice was the most honest witness they could ever have. You heard her. You heard her say his name. You heard her die. Do not let her voice go unanswered. It was devastating, persuasive, and carefully framed to silence doubt. The defense, in turn, begged the jury to see the gaps, to remember the possibility of misinterpretation, to question why the prosecution had refused to fully explore the later audio segments. If you convict a man without listening to the entire recording, you are not delivering justice. You are silencing the victim twice. It was powerful, but it felt drowned out against the tide. The jury retired to deliberate. Derek sat in holding, his hands clenched, staring at the scuffed table. Hours stretched into a day, then two. During this time, investigators back at the digital forensics lab worked quietly on the remaining audio, piece by piece, second by second. They filtered, enhanced, resynced. What they began to uncover would turn the case upside down, but none of it had yet reached the courtroom. The jury sat cloistered in their chamber, sifting through what they believed was a clear-cut case. Clara had cried out Derek's name. The timeline matched. The texts and blood pointed his way. Most jurors already leaned toward conviction. But in a digital lab across town, truth was clawing its way to the surface. The forensic analyst replayed the 1146 ambient file. At first, only distortion and static filled the room. But layer by layer, filters carved clarity from chaos. Footsteps, a zipper, a rustle. Then, a voice, not Derek's. The cadence was deeper, the vowels rounded, the rhythm different. Voice print analysis confirmed the mismatch. It belonged to someone entirely off investigators' radar. Seconds later, Clara's weakened voice emerged, ragged, breathless, but unmistakably deliberate. It wasn't Derek, it was Aaron. He followed me, he tricked me. Please tell them. He was with me at the shelter. That's how we met. Her words cracked, then silence. Investigators froze. They hadn't just uncovered more audio. They had uncovered Clara's dying testimony, hidden because everyone had stopped listening too soon. The name led detectives to Aaron Keller, a 34-year-old volunteer at a community shelter Clara had once attended for childcare support groups. On the surface, Aaron was a helper, polite, generous, always offering to carry boxes or fix a leaky faucet. No one had flagged him as dangerous. But as investigators dug deeper, a darker pattern emerged. Aaron had a history of failed relationships, women who described him as intense, suffocating, obsessive. One former girlfriend had filed a restraining order, citing unrelenting messages and unannounced visits. Another described him as the kind of man who doesn't take no for an answer. At the shelter, Aaron had gravitated toward Clara almost immediately. He'd help her load Ava into the car, linger after group meetings, offer unsolicited advice. Clara, ever kind, thanked him, even laughed at his jokes. To Aaron, it felt like connection. To Clara, it was politeness, until she noticed the stares, the late-night texts, the sense that he was watching even when she hadn't told him where she'd be. 2 weeks before her death, she blocked his number, and that rejection, in Aaron's mind, was betrayal. Investigators uncovered a disturbing truth. Aaron had been studying Clara's strained relationship with Derek. He knew the arguments, the angry texts, the simmering tension. To him, Derek was the perfect scapegoat. So he planned meticulously. He bought a jacket nearly identical to Derek's, wore a molded half-mask beneath the hood, and memorized Derek's routines. He'd been spotted circling Clara's neighborhood before, but no one suspected it wasn't Derek himself. On April 17th, Aaron struck. He knew Clara would mistake him for Derek in the moment of panic, and that mistake would be preserved forever on Alexa. And it worked. Her terrified cry of "Derek" became the very evidence police and prosecutors leaned on to frame the case. It was Aaron's camouflage, his loophole, his weapon. But what he didn't anticipate was Clara's strength. Gravely wounded, realizing she had seconds left, she turned toward the device she used every day and whispered the truth. In doing so, she broke the illusion Aaron had so carefully built. The killer's psychology. On Aaron's laptop, detectives found journals, hundreds of pages of warped longing and rage. He wrote about Clara as though she was already his partner. He fantasized about rescuing her from Derek, from the stress of school, from single motherhood. He imagined a life where Ava called him Dad. But alongside these fantasies were darker lines. She owes me her love. She doesn't get to walk away. If she won't let me save her, I'll save her my way. Derek will take the blame. No one will ever know. Search histories revealed his obsession with covering tracks, how to block cell tower tracking, how to mimic someone's voice for Alexa, how to delete recordings. He'd studied the very technology that betrayed him. Aaron Keller hadn't killed Clara in a moment of rage. He'd killed her in a calculated act of possession, obsession, and erasure, using Derek's shadow as his shield. When the enhanced audio was presented, the courtroom atmosphere shifted from certainty to shock. Jurors who had been ready to condemn Derek sat slack-jawed as Clara's final whisper played. It wasn't Derek, it was Aaron. The unmasking, the footsteps, the reality that they had almost convicted the wrong man. Derek's shoulders sagged with both relief and grief. He wasn't innocent of anger, of harsh words, of resentment, but he was innocent of murder. And now, at last, Clara herself had said so. Police arrested Aaron Keller in his apartment. They found the duffel bag with the jacket, gloves, and half-mask stuffed beneath his bed. Fibers matched Clara's carpet. A single drop of her blood was embedded in the inner lining of the mask. Even confronted with the evidence, Aaron smiled faintly and said, "She should have known I was the one." His trial was swift. This time, the Alexa recording wasn't truncated. Jurors heard Clara's desperate cry of, "Derek," and then her final whisper that rewrote everything. Aaron was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. The tragedy of Clara Jennings was not just her death. It was that her kindness, the instinct to smile, to help, to trust, became the very trait a predator exploited. She had once offered Aaron a gesture of human warmth at the shelter. In his fractured psyche, that was enough to claim ownership of her life. The case became a national flashpoint. Experts debated the role of smart devices in justice. Should investigators be required to review every second of audio? Could victims' dying words through machines be admissible as testimony? And what of privacy when our homes were filled with silent witnesses? But for Clara's family, the answer was simple. Her sister Danielle said outside the courthouse, "Without that device, Derek would be in prison for life. Without it, Aaron would still be out there." Clara saved herself with her last breath, and she saved all of us from living a lie. The courtroom victory didn't erase the loss. It didn't bring Clara Jennings back to tuck her daughter into bed, or to walk across the stage at her nursing graduation, or to light candles on Ava's 4th birthday cake. What it did bring was truth. Hard, brutal truth that spared Derek from a wrongful conviction and put the real killer behind bars. For Clara's family, that mattered. But it was still bittersweet. At her memorial, friends gathered under soft spring sunlight, their hands clutching white roses. Clara's classmates from the nursing program placed stethoscopes on her casket, symbols of the career she'd never get to finish. Children from the clinic where she worked drew cards with rainbows and flowers. Her sister, Danielle, spoke through tears. Clara was the kind of person who carried other people's burdens without ever asking anyone to carry hers. Even at the end, when she could barely breathe, she thought of Ava. And somehow, she thought of us. She told us who hurt her, so we wouldn't live in a lie. That's who she was. Brave, fierce, selfless. Those words stuck with everyone present. The case reverberated beyond Riverside Hills. Legal scholars dissected it in journals. Headlines debated, "Can smart devices testify?" Privacy advocates warned of the listening home, where every word and every sound might someday become evidence. But others argued the case was a turning point. Technology had done what humans could not, preserve the exact moment of truth. Not an interpretation, not a memory, not a guess. Clara's voice, intact, unshakable. The debate was polarizing, but one fact was undeniable. Without Alexa, Derek would likely have been convicted, and Aaron Keller would still be free. During sentencing, prosecutors revealed more of Aaron's journals. His writings painted a disturbing picture of a man who believed rejection was betrayal, who saw Clara as a possession, who believed taking her life was justified because she had denied him. He had even written, "She belongs to me. She just doesn't realize it yet. If she won't be mine in life, she'll be mine in silence." The words chilled even seasoned detectives. They showed that Aaron hadn't acted in a blind moment of rage. He had acted with calculation, malice, and a plan to ensure someone else would take the fall. It was a reminder that evil doesn't always look monstrous at first glance. Sometimes it looks like a helpful volunteer, a neighbor, a familiar face in a safe place. For Derek Lawson, the ordeal left scars that would never fully heal. He had been angry at Clara, resentful, frustrated. He had made mistakes, but he hadn't killed her. The tragedy was that his flaws had been enough for Aaron to weaponize against him. His texts, his temper, his history, all of it became the camouflage Aaron needed. Derek told reporters outside the courthouse, "People think I hated her. I didn't. I was lost. I was angry. But I never wanted this. I'll live with knowing I wasn't there to protect her. And I'll live with the fact that my name was the last one she spoke, even if it wasn't me." It was a haunting admission, one that showed the complexity of grief, guilt, and survival in the wake of such violence. At just 3 years old, Ava lost her mother to obsession and violence. She became the living reminder of everything Clara had fought for and everything Aaron had stolen. Family members vowed to raise her surrounded by love, to ensure she grew up knowing the truth of her mother's courage. Years later, when she would be old enough, they planned to play Clara's final words, not to traumatize her, but to show her that her mother's last act was to protect her, even as she died. What makes this case unforgettable isn't just the technology. It's the reminder that the most ordinary things in our homes, a speaker, a watch, a phone, can become the crucial witnesses we never expect. It also forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, that obsession can hide in plain sight, that predators can wear friendly faces, and that justice can come down to whether or not investigators choose to listen all the way through. For many, the story of Clara Jennings is both a tragedy and a warning. Clara's last whisper wasn't just evidence, it was her legacy, a young mother, in her final breaths, refusing to let her killer win. She didn't just give her family closure, she gave them the truth. So tonight, as we end this story, remember Clara not only as a victim, but as a fighter. Remember the little girl she left behind, and the family is still healing. And remember that sometimes the most unexpected witness can speak louder than any human voice. "We will never get Clara back," her family said in a statement, but knowing her truth was heard, that her voice cut through the lies, gives us peace. She was silenced, but not erased. I'm Martins, and on this channel, we explore how technology has solved cases in ways no one could imagine. If Clara's story moved you, I ask you to reflect. How much of our lives do we entrust to devices that quietly record, track, and log? Do they protect us, or do they threaten our privacy? Maybe it's both. If you want to hear more stories like this, cases where ordinary technology became the extraordinary witness, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss an upload. And more importantly, keep Clara's name alive. Share her story. Talk about the dangers of unchecked obsession. Remind people that kindness should never be punished, and that every voice, even a whisper, deserves to be heard. Because in the end, Clara Jennings spoke when it mattered most.